In this learning module, we're going to take a look at the science of trauma and why it matters in understanding adolescent behavior. But first we need to think a little bit about what trauma is, because sometimes we use trauma, adversity, maltreatment as though they are synonyms, and in fact they're not. It's important to appreciate that when we're talking about trauma, we're really talking about not just somebody being exposed to adversity, but somebody being exposed to adversity that overwhelms their capacities to psychologically defend themselves against this, hence resulting in psychological trauma. That is to say, all adversity creates stress, but not all adversity results in trauma and the disruption of functioning that comes with significant psychological trauma. One way of thinking about this is that some degree of stress, called foundational stress, is absolutely normative. It's important for children to have the ordinary experiences of frustration, of challenge, because that are the opportunities for them to gain mastery over themselves, over their environment, and to continue to learn and grow as they develop. So we need a certain amount of stress simply to challenge us and bring us to our greatest capacities. However, sometimes that kind of foundational stress can be too much. Now, it's not yet traumatizing. In fact, the term for it is tolerable stress. This is the kind of stress that you might see in some children developmentally, for example, if they begin struggling in school, or if they have a parental separation, or there's a loss in the family. However, it's called tolerable stress because with the assistance of buffering, caring adults around them, or peers or siblings around them, or with the accessing of their own resiliency factors, their grit, their determination, their forward focus, their intelligence, their willingness to seek and accept support from others, they manage the stress so that it doesn't become something that is developmentally disrailing for them. Toxic stress, which is stress that either severely, chronically, or both activates your body's stress response system, that over time can yield important changes in metabolism, in your immune system, in your brain function. All manner of sequelae arise from exposures to toxic stress that are not addressed. One of the things that we think about in terms of toxic stress or these kind of overwhelming stressors that move beyond the tolerable is the impact that it has on the brain. As the body's threat response system is activated over and over, it creates changes in the autonomic nervous system, it creates changes in the brain. Three particular areas I'll use for example. The amygdala, which is critical to your threat, fight, flight response system, actually gets larger than you would see ordinarily and is hypersensitive to potential threat. This makes it more difficult to control attention and concentration, more likely to see threat or perceive threat, even when it may not be there at all or is much less significant than you're reading it as. It also influences the development of the hippocampus. It slows down neural development in the hippocampus. The hippocampus is important for memory, and especially the transfer from short-term memory into long-term memory, which we call learning. And so persons who have high trauma loads often have less efficient memory capacities, which can compromise both their social learning and their academic learning. Finally, it appears that chronic exposures to stress and this kind of re-regulation of your body and the stress response system slows the development of the prefrontal cortex so that the capacities for inhibiting behavior or making complex decisions in challenging situations is diminished, and that can also take its toll on academic and social learning because you're less capable of being attentive, you're more likely to see threat, and you're more likely to have problems with academic and social learning memory, basically academic and social learning entirely. These exposures to high trauma loads over the course of development can impair memory, which impacts both social learning and academic learning. It also impairs capacities for attention and concentration. it will disrupt sleep regulation and architecture, and we are increasingly aware of how important well-regulated sleep and sound sleep architecture is for learning and for functioning. And finally, it often yields significant disruptions of emotional regulation, with some people becoming psychologically numbed, which can look very much like depression, and dampening down emotion, other people being hyper-reactive to emotional stimulation and tending then to dysregulate in social or academic contexts and compromising their development.